because I don't normally do this kind of thing. I was saying the only reason I'm here is because Chris Vosloo from AMB called me and asked me, won't I come and speak here? And so I said yes, because it's the first time in 20 years that Chris has asked me to do anything. And I know him very well, and I'm a great admirer of his. And so that's the reason I'm here. I must just say I'm not a commentator, because I know often at functions like these you have a commentator speaking to you, dishing out wisdom. That's not my job. I don't do that kind of thing. I don't have like 5 or 6 pet speeches which I can pull out for an appropriate audience. I'm also not a specialist at anything, and I don't represent anybody. I don't represent the government. I don't represent the ANC. In fact, I don't belong to any organization. As a matter of interest, I've just started my sabbatical. I retired last month as chairman of Sun International, and the previous month I retired as chairman of Anglo Platinum. I've been doing that. I retired from the board of Sanlam and Imperial, and I'm not active with Lareco anymore, which I used to be. So I'm just I was wondering whether I'm a retired gentleman, but these days it's like not. People don't take kindly to you saying you're retired. So I'm on sabbatical. That's what I think I am. I think I'm on sabbatical. So those are all disclaimers. Talking a little bit to Fawzia and others about your program and what you're going to talk about today, one of the things that I'm always struck by is how difficult it is to keep perspective. And that's just because human beings find it very, very difficult to keep perspective. And people always get quite surprised. Unlike most of you, I was born in the 1950s. And the population of the world around that time was somewhere around 2.5 billion people. In the late 50s, it went up to about almost 3 billion people. But depending on what you believe in, it took all of the time for human beings to build up to 2.5 billion people. If you're a scientist, that time would be about 150,000 years. It took 150,000 years for the human population, through huge struggle, to build up to 2.5 billion. And then, while I was still a young man, the population doubled. In a short space of time, it doubled to 5 billion. And now, when I reach my sabbatical, it is 3 times what it was when I was born. How's that? We're now at about 7.7 billion people. So in a very short space of time, the population of human beings has expanded exponentially. I mean, really, really exponentially. And so when people talk about, the good old days, they don't always have the perspective about how different the world is. And so we had 3 interesting political phenomena around the world recently. One was the South African election. The second was the elections in India, which is the world's biggest democracy. They had about 1 million voting stations in that elections. And it's so huge and so big that they must have had about 6 million election officers and something like 37 days to complete the whole election. So it's like a huge exercise. But they did it and they completed it. And then we've had the elections for the European Parliament, the results which were announced about 2 days ago. And one of the things this points to, one of the things, and I think Ibrahim Fakir, who is a specialist, would know more than me about this, but one of the things that we're seeing is that the old construct of political parties don't work anymore. When I was a young political activist, what we thought this organism called political party was actually doesn't fit into the world today. For a start, it doesn't fit into the digital world, and it certainly doesn't fit into the world of Twitter at all. Take the party that got most of the votes, day before yesterday in the UK, the Brexit Party was only formed 45 days ago, and they did all their communication over Twitter, and most of what they needed to say, they could say in 3 or 4 words. Because basically they were saying so-and-so is bad, so-and-so is bad, so-and-so is bad, without having to prove anything. And that is so simple, you know, not complicated messages, you know. Or if you take Trump, you know, it's easy. Mexicans are bad. Obvious. What do you mean why? You know, those sorts of things. So it's like the world has changed in so many ways, and we can't keep perspective. Coming to our own situation, the crime and corruption, and particularly the corruption and fraud in the ruling party and in government and in various other, in the private sector that we've had, in the moment it's difficult to actually understand and to keep perspective. And one of the things I try to do is, you know, because I was involved in the drafting of the Constitution, and prior to that, in the 80s, I was a full-time political revolutionary. I did it on a full-time basis. It was my professional, that was my profession. I didn't do it on a part-time over weekends or anything of that sort. And I was either in detention without trial. I was never charged because I was always involved in the United Democratic Front, which was a peaceful organization, or I was out, you know, organizing this or that. And I try to take my mind back to that, and I say, take your mind back to 1984 and look at today. What does it look like from there? And the crooks that we've had in government actually shouldn't, we should be disappointed, but we shouldn't be so surprised like we had imagined that after we become free that every South African will be angelic. You know, if we thought that, then we just got ourselves to blame. Because human beings, the human population is a good mixture of good and bad, you know, angelic people and crooks and thieves and whatnot, you know, that's just all over the world, that's what it is. And adopting the new constitution or becoming what we called the Rainbow Nation doesn't necessarily change the essence of what human beings are. And so if people have an opportunity to steal and get away with it, the propensity for human beings to steal is very high, and they would do it. And therefore we need to put in place a whole lot of belts and braces to see to it that people don't steal, or if they steal, they don't get away with it. So we had, in the latter years of the Zuma administration, we all know, I don't have to tell you all of the stuff that went on there. But what it did, for me, what it did is that it put our constitution to a test. And the way I see it is that if you're a human being with a poor immune system, your immune system is compromised. Now when winter kicks in, you're going to catch a cold very easily, or you're going to get a flu very easily. And when you catch a cold, you're going to take a long time to recover because your immune system is depleted. And if you pick up a more serious infection with a poor immune system, your immune system cannot fight the infection off, and it may even kill you. You know, that's why old people in their 70s die of flu. Department of Health this time of the year says to those people, get your flu vaccine because it kills them. Their immune system is weak. So here we had the thieves and all of the state capturers and all that came in. And I think our as a country, our immune system was put to a test. And I'm so proud that what we have is a fairly robust immune system. Firstly, we have a free press and a free media that didn't hold back at all in exposing the wrongdoing that was going on. And it is truly a free media. Nothing has ever happened to any journalist who has written about the president, or any commentator who has gone on television or radio condemning all of the wrongdoing that was going on. Nobody went to jail, nobody was killed, nothing of that. There's very few countries where that would happen. So we have a free press, And it was put to the ultimate test whether we do have a free press. Secondly, we have an independent and courageous judiciary. Remember that the judiciary is appointed directly or indirectly by the government, what ordinary people understand by the government. It's not exactly the president who appoints the judges. It's a complicated process, but notwithstanding that, we have an independent judiciary. The third thing is that we have political freedom. And one of the results of that is that you have opposition parties in parliament. And the opposition parties played their part in exposing all of the wrongdoing that was going on through activities that we know about. Then we had the opposition from within the ruling party. Some of the strongest opposition came from within the ANC itself. You know about the ANC veterans, you know about the ANC component in parliament, and all of those sorts of things. And then, of course, the private sector. It's not often that top CEOs, bandy together in order to take a political stand, but they did this under the situation. And I can mention a number of other sorts of things. All of this resulted in the removal of Jacob Zuma as the president. That's what happened at the end of the day. And it resulted in a situation where today we have a new president. The difference between the old and the new president is like the difference between day and night. And we've been able to fight off this infection that came to us and survive it. Are the crooks in jail? Not really. Are they on the run? Yes, they're on the run. And I think that's the important thing. The important thing is that the corruption and the fraud has been arrested. It's by and large been stopped. It's not happening. And those that were involved in it are either held up in commissions or in court, or they're sitting in Dubai or wherever else. But they're on the run in one way or another. And that says a lot for the constitution that we've got. And as somebody, I spent 9 years of my life on the drafting of the new constitution. And one of the things that you always think about is, what if the worst happens? What do you need to have in the constitution to ensure that we can't easily turn into a dictatorship? That the military generals can't suddenly walk into the union buildings and take over and turn this into a military dictatorship. That, those sorts of things. That human rights cannot be rolled back easily. And I think, I would say this, I think we've had a near perfect constitution when we adopted it, and it's proved its muster recently. So this should give us it gives me an enormous amount of optimism for our society and our country. It's not just the Constitution, because with the best of Constitution, if society didn't fight against the corruption as a whole, we wouldn't have succeeded. And I think that we're a wonderful nation that can take things forward. When Chris said I should speak, he said I should comment on the new cabinet, which is supposed to have been announced on Sunday. So I can't do that. But I just want to say something which may be obvious to some of you, but I worked with President Ramaphosa very closely. We were in a struggle together in the 80s, and when he was Secretary General of the ANC, he was together we negotiated the settlement with the apartheid regime and were involved in the drafting of the Constitution. When he was the chair of the Constitutional Assembly in the final period of 94, 95, 96, I was the lead negotiator for the ANC in the drafting of the Constitution. So we worked very closely together. And I just cannot believe our lucky stars that this man has become the president. I'm obviously friendly with him, so take it as a bit of bias. But I think that we are extremely fortunate. It's really a case of cometh the time, cometh the man. Here is a man who has well, apart from the fact that he's really above average intelligence, and normally you wouldn't have to make that point, but if you look at world leaders around today, I think that it's not obvious that leaders are intelligent, or if you look at leaders that we've had. And I think I've worked with Cyril, and I can tell you this is a very intelligent man. Secondly, it's combined with superior managerial skills, which is not always the case with politicians, because to get elected, to get people to vote for you, and to excite people in a campaign doesn't necessarily mean you've got managerial skills. Here is a man that has it. He built up the biggest trade union in the history of this country, the National Union of Mine Workers, at a time when it was very difficult to build trade unions. In the 80s, he built it up from scratch, from zero to about, 300,000 members or something of that sort at the time. And he also was the first Secretary General of the ANC when it became a political party. He established the ANC as a political party that it is today. The other important thing about Cyril is that he's almost by nature a consensus seeker. He likes consensus. He likes to do something where he can feel that, well, we got everybody to agree to it. But not only does he like consensus, he also is good at building consensus. It's one of his skills. He can really build consensus. Look at our Constitution today. It's loved by everybody. People really like the Constitution. And there are two reasons for that. One is because of its superior content, but the other is because of the manner in which it was drafted and adopted. It wasn't done in a confrontational way, but in a consensus-building way. I see Ibrahim is shifting in his chair. Am I over my time? Not yet, eh? You'll wave or say something if I'm going on. I did promise that I'll leave a bit of time for questions, so I will do that. But I just want to mention these attributes about our president and why we're so lucky. The other is because of his self-confidence. He's not afraid of talent. And I've seen leaders who are so insecure in their own boots that they're afraid of talent. And a man who's not afraid of talent means that he will with ease be able to work with the clever people who are in this room, for example. He's not afraid of clever people. He doesn't feel intimidated by them. If you remember, and a lot of presidents around the world are frightened of clever people. Our former president used to make the point every now and then. He used to say, "These clever people don't like me," And it's part of it is an insecurity about not feeling comfortable with people who are really smart. And perhaps the last thing to say about our president, people will say, what would I do if I was the president? There's so many challenges. What are we going to do? How are we going to deal with all of this? I think the man, having seen the man over so many decades, he thrives on complexity. He actually, you'll almost think he likes things because they are so complex. He's able to organize complexity in his mind in a manner which I don't think I can do, and which not many people can do. So that's the point I wanted to make about him. I want to just talk a little bit about the land issue, of all the many things that one can talk about. Somebody asked me, I think the CEO of Mazi Capital asked me whether I would say something about the land issue. So to preempt his question, let me just comment about it a little bit. He's not the only one who asked me that question, because just to take you back, what happened was that the EFF said that the land that was stolen from black people must be given back to black people. African people must be given back to African people. And they said, what can be wrong with that? Isn't that justice? And so that's what they said. Then at the ANC conference in Nasrec, which was held in December 2017, the ANC Some people say in an attempt to out EFF, the EFF took the same decision. And they took the decision that the Constitution must be amended to provide for expropriation without compensation. So it appears by that is meant that government must be able to take land away from white people and give it to African people, because the forefathers of the current white people stole it, so it's stolen property, and they stole it from the forefathers of African people, so it must be given back. And so that was the logic to the thing. Not a complicated logic, and not necessarily a wrong logic either, you know. So the NESREC took that decision. And then in last year, beginning of 2018, when they all went back to Parliament, they took a decision in Parliament that the Constitution should, this is now a decision of Parliament. There's a resolution, I went and read it. The Constitution should be amended to provide for expropriation without compensation. And then Parliament set up a multi-party committee of Parliament under the chairpersonship of Toko Didiza to draft the amendment to the Constitution. Earlier this year, that committee had its first meeting. I think it was February or so. And so they decided that they would call for expert advice at their first meeting before they start their deliberations on what they should do. And so they called me. Chris is not the only one who thinks that I have something useful to say. So they called me to talk to them about how they should change the Constitution. And I want to just tell you very briefly what I told them. I told them firstly that there isn't anything anything that should make us over nervous about amending the Constitution, because the drafters of the Constitution did think that at times the Constitution may have to be amended. And that is why the Constitution has got detailed provisions for what an amendment procedure would be. It's not easy to amend it, but you can amend it if you want to. So I thought, don't let people tell you that you are evil because you want to amend the Constitution. Then that in itself doesn't constitute anything evil. Secondly, if you want to amend or remove the clause on property rights, that too is not necessarily an immoral, unethical, or evil thing to do. Most constitutions around the world don't even have a clause that talks about property rights, don't even have the words property rights in the Constitution. So there's no reason why it does or does not belong. It could or it could not. If you remove it, well, you could remove it if you want to. I must just tell you that property rights is not considered to be internationally, and in terms of United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, it's not considered to be a fundamental human right. Fundamental human rights are the right to freedom of speech, freedom of movement, the right to choose the government of your choice, the right to have not to have your body violated, etc., etc., etc. There are fundamental freedoms that we have. Other policy things that we may be interested in are do not necessarily have the same status as fundamental human rights. And property rights actually is not a fundamental human right. We have put it in our Constitution under the section dealing with fundamental human rights, which is not wrong, but if you remove it, you will also not be wrong. So I explained that whole thing to the committee. So I said, feel at ease, you're not doing anything criminal here. If you want to do that, you can do that. And then I explained to them why we have property rights in our Bill of Rights. How is it that in South Africa we ended up there? And it is not true that the main and only reason was to protect the farms that white people and the land that white people stole from black people. The truth of the matter is that under apartheid, African people were not allowed to own fixed property. the law did not allow African people to own land. In fact, it was illegal for African people to own land. And where they did own land, it was taken away. Not only was it taken away without compensation, it was even taken away without any kind of notice whatsoever. Right into the 80s, when I was a political activist, the apartheid regime was going with bulldozers to villages not far away from Pretoria here, surrounding them at 2 a.m. And when people wake up at about 4 or 5 a.m., they find that they're surrounded with trucks and bulldozers loaded up, their land taken away, and they get dumped somewhere in some sort of a, what used to be called black spots or a Bantustan or something of that sort. That's how land was taken away from people. It's not only that it was stolen in the days of Jan van Riebeck. The theft went on until fairly recently. So when we were drafting this constitution after the end of the liberation struggle, and now that we were going to be free, one of the things that freedom meant is that African people, one, should have the right to own land if they wanted to, and two, no government should be able to take it away. Soma. It shouldn't happen. You shouldn't be able to just take away a person's property the way it was done under apartheid. That's what happened under apartheid. And that's the whole thing. So I said to them, now if you remove this thing, what are you going to say to those of us who under apartheid witnessed the theft of property? Are you going to say it can be done again now? So that which we put into the constitution to protect this thing can be taken away. So of course they were all quite shocked. They were very nice, I must say. They listened to me very, very carefully. Now, that's the one point I made. The other point I made to them is this will be the first time since the adoption of the Constitution in October 1996 that the Bill of Rights will be amended. And of course it can be amended. I said, you're not being evil if you amend the Bill of Rights. But how do you amend the Bill of Rights? Because it's never been done. How are you going to do it? If you follow the rules in the Constitution, it says you must give 30 days notice in the Gazette, and then there should be a vote of at least a two-thirds majority of MPs must vote in favor of it. It's got all sorts of, rules of how to do it. But if you only follow the rules, then all you're doing is that you're thinking that changing the Constitution is the same as abiding by traffic regulations when you drive. What do the rules say? This is of a different order. It's not the same thing as abiding by traffic regulations. I say you'll have to invent a way of amending the Constitution. Because if you don't, and you set a precedent, the Bill of Rights, not other elements. If you set a precedent that it's easy to amend the Bill of Rights, you just got to follow the procedure. In 10 years' time, when we have a hodgepodge coalition, because we will have a coalition government in 10 years' time, and they make all sorts of internal compromises and decide to amend the Bill of Rights and maybe take away some real rights, you would have set that precedent. So that's my story as far as the land thing is concerned. And because I want to leave some time for questions, I will just say to you that I've been deeply involved in the drafting of the clause in the Constitution that deals with the land question, with property rights. I will be involved in, just as a concerned citizen, very deeply if Parliament attempts to change it. But I'm not having sleepless nights. There's going to be no widespread expropriation without compensation at all. I can talk for half an hour as to why that's the case. No such things are going to happen. Actually, nobody wants it to happen. And the main thing is that there's no need for it to happen. There's just no need. Because what land redistribution and amending the Constitution have only a tangential relationship to each other. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take a few questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Musa. We are going to have a roving mic going around the audience. while people do think of questions, I'm going to take the opportunity to hand over to the professional. Somebody's going to take us through for the facilitation of the day. Ibrahim Fakir, Director of Programs at the Arwell Socio-Economic Research Institute. He's a lecturer, he's a policy analyst, and a commentator on general politics. And I have great pleasure in handing over to him to take us through the day and hopefully tease out the questions, ask the right things to the panels down the line, but also take us through the questions that anyone might have for Mr. Musa.
Thanks. Any questions? Go ahead.
Mr. Musa, just back to your comments about President Ramaphosa not being afraid of talent. Could you give us some examples of who that talent is that he's surrounded himself with now, who's, most of the time been out of the public eye? Some people that, if you read the press, you wouldn't be aware of.
Yeah, look, I must tell you that I don't have any knowledge that you don't have. Which is the truth. Now, it's interesting. A lot of people think I have an inside track. Actually, I would consider the president to be a personal friend, but it doesn't tell me anything, nor do I ask him. So I really don't know. But I got a feeling, it's a pity we don't know who the cabinet is, but I think we'll get some idea from where he does do that. And he came in after Zuma was removed, and my sense, my feeling, just my own feeling, is that he was sort of in a mode of that he is a standby, a stand-in president, an interim president, and he wasn't firing on all pistons, and he didn't kick in fully, which is what I think is going to happen now. Although he did do a number of things, he changed the head of the National Prosecutorial Authority. He made a number of changes. Some of the people that have been brought onto, a guy like Jabu Mabuza being appointed as the chair of ESCOM. You look at a number of sort of, people with talent that have been brought in. But I think we're going to see much more of that now. That's my feeling. Yeah. That doesn't mean that in the world of politics, you shouldn't do what you need to do in order to hold things together. And so that requires a kind of a political balance, so to say, which I think he will also do.
Thank you, Mr. Valimusa. That was amazing background with the land issue. I really appreciated that. Just moving forward in terms of low-hanging fruits for the president, if there's any low-hanging fruits, I mean, you're involved in government, you're involved in ANC for a long time. So what do you think are those low-hanging fruits for the president to kind of bring back, business confidence, consumer confidence, back into our country?
Yeah, I don't think there are too many. I think it's just going to be a long, hard slog. But my view is that if he does substantially reduce the size of cabinet, he will be sending the signal that he cares about the public purse. And I think that's an important signal to send. My view is that the budget that we have is too big for the national budget is too big for the size of our economy. I think the 1.6 or 1.7 trillion rand budget, which is somewhere there, it's far too big. Even though, economists will argue with each other as to whether the debt levels are inordinate or not, and then they compare to other countries and those things. I'm not too concerned about that, but I am concerned about the budget doesn't leave fiscal space for investment in the economy and in economic infrastructure. And so I think that, and that's not low-hanging fruit, unfortunately. It's the hard stuff. But I think that that's something the president must look at. He's got to look at he's got to say, we can't afford this budget. We just can't afford it. You know, there's nothing wrong with saying you can't afford something. Because I think what happened was that in 2009, when the Zuma administration came in, there was this view that the previous administrations were fiscally too tight and too stingy, and so the way to do things is to spend money. And so the big spenders came in, not necessarily spending money on themselves, but growing the public service and the wage bill and such things. And it's unsustainable. It doesn't leave us any space whatsoever to do proper economic infrastructure, which is what is going to lead to growth kicking in. So I think, unfortunately, that's what we've got. There's no low-hanging fruit. There's only the tough stuff that needs to be done. Something needs to be done about Eskom and the SAA. You cannot have the debt continuing to grow at the rate that it's going to grow. The debt is not going to go away. It's there. It belongs to you and I, unfortunately, and we can't run away from it. But you can arrest it. You can arrest the debt and then start dealing with it. So, and I think the president said something very brave when he made the announcement about the restructuring of Eskom. And I think the Minister of Finance said something brave when he talked about SAA. But I think those are things that hopefully now the president, with the confidence he's got of having won the election, he would be able to attend to that also.
Mr. Musa, I wonder if you could comment on the position of the president in the ANC. Is it as precarious as some of the newspapers suggest?
Not at all. The president is not elected by the National Executive Committee. He's elected at National Conference, which has once every 5 years. So he's directly elected. He's not appointed by the National Executive Committee, and the National Executive Committee cannot remove him as president of the ANC. So his position of president of the ANC is not in challenge, unless he does something of a serious disciplinary nature or something. But of course, when it comes to being the state president, we have seen in the past that the National Executive Committee took steps to remove Thabo Mbeki, and more recently took steps to remove Jacob Zuma. So theoretically, it could do that if the president loses complete support of the National Executive Committee. But right now, there's no signs that he doesn't have sufficient support in the National Executive Committee. My own feeling is that he's got the support, and 5 years, in another 4 years' time, when the ANC has its conference, he will get elected as a president again with a bigger mandate and stronger support from the NEC. So I don't think this. Yeah, I'm pretty confident that he'll be the president for 2 terms. I'm pretty confident about that.
Morning, Mr. Musa. I respect your decision to take sabbatical, but here's a question for you. If the president were to give you a call this morning and convince you to come out of your sabbatical, would you do it? And secondly, again, if he were to turn to you to give him advice as to what to do and how to deal with the factions within the ANC, which I think, in my opinion, will actually distract him from actually governing, what would be your advice?
How to deal with the factions?
And manage them. So that
firstly, to say that I spent 2 terms as a member of parliament, 2 terms in cabinet, and I retired from politics, and I don't like to go into reverse, go back. So I won't do that at all. But that does not mean that I, like you and everybody else, don't have a role to play in public life. And there are places where I think maybe I could make a good impact. I don't know if I can make a good impact as a cabinet minister, frankly, after all these years. I think young people should do it, really, because you need a lot of guts. You must be prepared to take risks and work very hard and those sorts of things. And it shouldn't be too many old people. It's, this outgoing government was too old, and they were acting old too. It's just shouldn't do that. So that but I'll give you one example. When we adopted the Constitution, I said earlier it was a near perfect Constitution. But one of the big imperfections was that the Constitution did not regulate political parties. Our political parties are the most unregulated entities in South Africa. So everything is regulated. Parliament passes a lot of laws to regulate the lives of listed companies, the lives of private companies, the lives of financial service providers like all of you, and those sorts of things. There's a lot of laws and a lot of regulations, which is good, because God knows what you people would do without all those regulations. So there's a lot of, but the political parties are unregulated. They are a law unto themselves. Yet these are the people that are in charge of the country. And there's been a conspiracy of silence between the political parties about this because they like to be unregulated. So the opposition parties don't make a noise about it because they don't want to be regulated, and the ruling party doesn't make a noise about it. And the one big part of regulation that I felt extremely bad about, that we didn't deal with it at the time of the Constitution, was regulating the funding of political parties. Our political parties can get money from anybody they want to. They can even take money from a foreign government. So the Russians can fund a political party in our parliament, and it is not illegal. They can take money from any other foreign source. They can take money from anybody in the country. They could take all their money from one person or one company. It's not regulated at all. Because if you take all your money from one person, you are, in essence, I suppose that would be the meaning of captured. But what's even worse is that you don't need to tell anybody where you're getting your money from. So when you and I vote, we think we're voting for so-and-so, but actually we're voting for somebody else who owns that party, but we wouldn't know. And it makes our democracy very vulnerable. There's no other country in the world where it's as unregulated as that. And then, of course, there's the obvious stuff about corruption. Somebody gives money to a party and they get a tender after the elections. So about 2 years ago, just in my capacity as a concerned citizen, I started working on this matter. And because of my background and experience, and frankly, all of the political parties still, are prepared to consider seriously what I say. And I'm happy to say that Parliament, towards the end of last year, passed legislation, a bill, to regulate the funding of political parties, and President Ramaphosa signed it, assented to it about a month ago, about a month before the elections. It's now on the statute books. And going forward from here, the political landscape is going to change completely. Every donation a party gets will have to be disclosed to the Independent Electoral Commission, and the Independent Electoral Commission on a quarterly basis will publish a list of all donations that each party has received. It places a cap on the upper limit of how much a party may take from one donor. It prohibits foreign funding and a whole lot of other stuff. But, that's what I worked on. I more or less wrote that legislation. So I don't think I need to be in government or have a position in the ANC to contribute to society. So, I think we can do that. As far as dealing with the factions in the ANC, I don't think we should get over nervous about it. Our factions are mild compared to the factions in the Conservative Party in the UK. That's now bloody, I mean, our politicians look rough. Actually, they're just like sort of, and, we talk about our populists. They say, people say Malema is a populist, he's wild, he makes wild statements and all of those sorts of things. But the guy who got most of the votes in the UK day before yesterday is a guy called Nigel Farage. And in France, the person is Marine Le Pen. Those two make Malema look really mild and meek, sensible, balanced, well-balanced, and all of that. So it's the stuff of politics. I think if we don't have factions in our political parties, maybe we should get worried. The DA has got its factions, the EFF has got its factions. That's just what it is. It's politics. That's politics, and it's how democracies work. We can wish it could be different, but I don't think we can work out a better way to exercise democracy than what we have. It's just what it is.
You noticed that I was shifting shiftily in my seat. I wasn't. I was actually looking for the people who don't like the Constitution. But I see they're not in the room. So just two quick questions. How confident are you that people actually like the Constitution as much as you say they like the Constitution? And secondly, you've given us lots of advice from your life in politics, but you haven't given us any advice from your life in business. And so what would you say executives need to do to help President Ramaphosa along, other than saying that people must vote for him?
Yeah. What was your first question, sorry?
Do people really love the Constitution?
There's been, there are people who do this market research of brands, South African brands, and then they say Coca-Cola normally comes up quite high up, and sometimes an individual, the president's name comes up high up. The Constitution always comes up very high as number one in most of those surveys, that market research surveys that are, people say, what do you trust? Helen Zille, the South African Constitution, Jacob Zuma, Anglo-American. Which one do you trust the most? They do it, in that sort of way. And the Constitution always comes up top. That's the one. But the other is that in everything that has been happening up to now, people have been saying when they want to prove their point, they say or argue against something, they say, but you are going against the Constitution. So that's what it has, a very, very high level of legitimacy. I'm not saying everybody agrees with it, but it has a high level of legitimacy, and constitutions around the world are under attack by populists, as you know, not just here, but around the world. And here, when one of the problems with the way the land issue was dealt with, both by the EFF and the ANC, I must say, is they create the impression that that the Constitution is a problem, when it's not a problem. It's not a problem in that regard. But that's the one point. Look, I think that people have asked me, they say, I was president of the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which is the world authority on biodiversity. It produces the authoritative endangered list of red data species, endangered species, and such things. I served as a president for 4 years of that. I've been chair, the president of WWF South Africa for the past 10 years. I just stood down a few months ago because I served the full allowable term that's possible. I've been involved in the global climate change negotiations, and was involved quite intimately in conceptualizing the 2015 Paris global climate agreement and all. They say you're involved in all of those sorts of things. How can you be at the head of a mining company? Because I was chairman of Anglo-American Platinum for so many years, etc. And I must tell you that the South African businesses have become very, very responsible as far as ESG is concerned, and particularly because of the requirement for companies to set up a social and ethics committee, and particularly because of the early adoption of the approach to do an integrated report. I think those are things that there's hardly a company that doesn't measure its impact on the environment, its impact on society, and report on its governance. We still have a handful of companies, some of them among the biggest, that do that and then cheat on the side with their governance and those sorts of things, cheat shareholders, etc. But as I said, you'll get human beings who'll do it if they can get away with it. But I think that we've got to be forward-looking. Take, for example, recently the president signed into law the carbon tax that's coming. Now, you could say that we're an economy, we've got so many problems, so many headwinds, why do it now? But this is something that's the movement towards requiring businesses to be more responsible to the needs of the environment and environmental protection is only going in one direction. It's not going to become less, it's going to become more and more onerous as time goes on. And I think the government has done a wonderful thing by introducing a carbon tax, but ever so softly, with a soft touch. And it begins to give the signal to the CEOs that we better start thinking about this seriously. And I think the response from the private sector will be much more than is required by the carbon tax. It will not be measured. Take, for example, the tax on sugar. When the government was saying, the Department of Health was saying there should be a tax on sugar because sugar has become one of the biggest killers and one of the causes of biggest health problems, etc., those sorts of things. And there was a hell of a debate about it. And then people said, oh, well, if you're going to have a tax on sugar, it's just going to, chocolates are just going to cost more. That's all that's going to happen. People are not going to consume less. But last week, Coca-Cola made a phenomenal announcement, Coca-Cola South Africa. I don't know if all of you saw it in the newspapers, but they said that because of the new sugar tax, they will be reducing the sugar content in all the Coke products in South Africa across the board by 25%, including your regular normal Coke. It will have 25% less sugar because of the tax. And so, I think that's the direction. So what will a forward-looking CEO do? Is actually embrace these things as you go forward, rather than do it in a sense kicking and screaming. And I think those companies that have done so haven't been caught on the wrong foot as such. As far as the government is concerned, we saw that when Jacob Zuma fired Nhlanhla Nene, that the top CEOs took a public stand. And I think the CEOs can't stand aside when we have serious challenges in society. They've got to be part of the solution. And I think it needs to be encouraged. It's got to be a two-way thing. It's got to be encouraged by government, but the private sector has also got to do that kind of thing. And then, of course, I think we have a responsibility from the private sector side to understand that if we want to attract investment into our economy, and I'm not now differentiating between foreign investment and domestic investment. I think we overrate the differentiate. People say, oh, foreigners won't invest. Frankly, if foreigners got a good reason not to invest in a South African company, Company A, I'm not going to invest my pension in that company either, because I'm probably going to see the same things they see, So it's just, if we want investment, then one of the things we need to do is that we need to to play a part in developing a growth story for South Africa, but we also need to make sure that we're not ourselves unwittingly contributing to unnecessary negativity about our economy. We do have negatives, but we have lots of positives. And I think we all have a part to play in encouraging international and domestic investment in our economy. I think that's very important. And often it's more credible when it comes from the private sector. You know, if a CEO stands up and says, our government is bad, they just got too many taxes, we'll never be able to make profit here, there's a lot of crime, and we have no productivity because our workers are lazy, and we've got so many public holidays, and the union's up to no good. I mean, why would anybody invest in such a thing if the CEO is saying it? I'm not going to invest in your company if that's what you say, you know, is the environment you're operating in. But often CEOs don't see that they, in a sense, it's a vicious circle. You're contributing to your own problems. That's what I would say, Brian. Thanks.
Mr. Valimusa, I've got a simple question. Maybe it's not so simple to answer, but it's simple to ask. You say the president is a consensus seeker, and he is probably the first, if I could call it that, the first coalition president of the ANC. Previous presidents have had all-out majorities. So how long does this progress take, or the changes that he's trying to implement take, if he has to consistently seek consensus?
Yeah, I don't know. I suppose it would depend on situation, you know, from situation to situation. But so far, I think he's done very well. I'll give you an example. So he did a cabinet reshuffle, I can't remember when, but not a long time ago. And then people like, commentators like Ibrahim Fakir there were saying, oh, well, he had an opportunity to fire Batabile Dlamini, but he didn't. He should have fired her. So when he was asked at a press conference, what do you think about Minister Dlamini, why didn't you fire her? He said, Minister Batabile Dlamini, I would have you know, is a very good minister, and she's doing a good job. Are there any other questions? So he did that because he needed a certain consensus in order to do what needed to be done so that, you know, there could be a positive outcome in the elections and such things. So I don't, you know, I think if you make consensus seeking paralyze you, which can happen, then it's a problem. It mustn't paralyze you. You need to be able to be decisive. I got a feeling that the president is in a mood to be very decisive. I think I mean, if you look at the changes that he's made, I mean, he's removed from almost all important positions outside of cabinet people who are suspect. If you think about it, you know, just about everybody in a fairly short space of time. So he's somebody that can be decisive. I just want to say one thing I was going to say when I spoke about his list of attributes that are not often seen, and one of which is that he's not an overly ideological person. I think it's not an observation many people make, but I think he's not overly ideological in the sense that he doesn't say when he wakes up in the morning as a left social democrat, what am I supposed to do in this situation? You know, or as a socialist, what am I supposed to do? Or as a center left this, what am I supposed to do? He's the type of guy who would say what's the right thing to do. And I think not all politicians behave in that way. He doesn't instinctively just want to fit things into an ideological cloak, everything. And I think that's the right thing for now, because I think with some of the comments I made in my introduction, this whole sort of left-right political ideological spectrum is up for grabs right now. Nobody knows whether it's really of any relevance whatsoever, but some people hold on to it very tightly as if it's the answer to everything. Thank you. Brian?
Mr. Musa, just a final question from me. I was particularly enthused by your stance in terms of not wanting to go into reverse and saying that we need younger people in Parliament. I think you're right, and I think in addition to just needing the energy and the agility that you speak about, I think it is necessary in order to attract the youth vote,
Yeah.
which we know we're struggling to do. What do you think can be done within the structures to invite, for it to be more inclusive and to invite younger people to want to be a part of it? Do you think anything can be done in terms of the structures itself?
When you say structure, I don't know, you mean like cabinet? Or, you know?
Yes, that's right.
I was interested, I was listening, I saw that the Premier of KwaZulu-Natal, Sisla Zikalala, appointed his provincial cabinet yesterday, announced the names, and then this morning the commentators were saying that he appointed a youthful cabinet and the average age is around 44 or something of that sort. So I think what our leaders need to do is just appoint young people. I mean, you know, how difficult is it to know that the people between the ages of 30 and 45 are actually cleverer than us? And what's complicated about that? And if you look around at world leaders, people are choosing young people. When Macron became the president of France, he must have been about 40 or 39 or somewhere there. When Obama became president, he was 44. You know, you got, I just think it needs to be done. It's a question of perspective. You know, when people grow old all together, then they look at each other and they think they don't see old people. You know? It's just, it's just, you know. So, and then they think, how can you appoint an inexperienced young person? But I tell you, you know, if you're a cabinet minister for too long, you lose perspective. Because what happens is that you come to a place like this, you're the president, and you are Jacob Zuma. And then the staff, as you walk in, will get very excited when they see you. They know you're a crook, but you're a hell of a famous guy. They want to take pictures with you, selfies with you and all that, and then you say, these people love me. That's the conclusion. That's what you read into the thing. But actually what's happening is that, you know, it could have been the gangster Krejavik. You know, if he walked through here, people may want to take selfies with him. You know, people are just like that. But they lose perspective. And you live such a protected life as a leader, surrounded by your bodyguards and all of those sorts of things, that you don't see this kind of thing. But I think with Ramaphosa it's different. You know, let's think about, I looked at the people that he appointed when he was running a company, and the people he appointed as his managers and the CEO, they were young people. And I think, you know, maybe he does understand that young people are cleverer. Maybe, you know, because would you give your money to an old man to manage, or would you give your money to a young, clever person to manage? You know, it's a sort of that kind of thing. I think he's different. We're very lucky to have somebody who has experience both in government and in the private sector. And he's got, you know, heavy-duty experience in the private sector. So we're very fortunate as far as that is concerned. As you can see, I only got praise for my president, you know. But I did declare that at the outset. Thank you, Brian.